So hi, Mommy.
Hello, John.
So I'm your son, Johnny.
I think I'm well aware of that.
Yeah. I hope he,
50 years of,
oh,
I will not say the word.
it's, please, thanks. Or you can say it, I'll just edit it out.
Oh, okay.
So Mom, what's your name?
My name is Anastasia Eileen Clark, but I happen to marry John Murphy. So my name now is Anastasia Eileen Murphy.
Oh, okay. And where were you born?
I was born in outside of a place called Stenhousemuir, and our address was always by Falkirk, so it was near the town of Falkirk in Stirlingshire, Scotland.
So what was your address growing up?
Originally the address was 40 Plantation Cottages, and then for some reason they changed it to 167 Bellsdyke Road.
And is now, if
Why?
somebody wanted to look for it right now, what's it
It
currently?
would be 167 Bellsdyke Road.
And then,
Why they changed it, I have no idea.
and then what?
Why they made it Plantation Cottages,
Right.
the origin of that I have no idea, because they weren't cottages.
So is it, so it's Bellsdyke Road and what's the county or?
Stirlingshire.
Stirlingshire, okay. And when were you born?
I was born March 28, 1938.
And what was the names of your parents?
My father's name was George Murdo Clark. My mother's name was Cecilia Patricia Gallagher.
Now, do you know what years were they born?
I don't remember. Like 1905 or something
Okay.
like that. My mother was a year older than my father.
So think back when you were little. What's your earliest memories?
My earliest memories was a flash of being in the McLean's backyard, and the woods were in the back and they had a lot of tall trees. But then later on, there were no trees in the woods, just around the perimeter. And the woods consisted of small bushes that had grown up. And what had happened, which I never realized, and I have no memory of this, that they cut down all the trees for the war effort.
Oh,
And as well as, because I was born in 1938, and the war started in September 1939. And so my early childhood was the war,
right.
which was a war with Germany, the Second World War.
Right.
And so that was the dominant factor in our young lives during that time. Although we didn't have a real awareness of the war. The only thing that I remember was lying and playing over the woods, and we would see what we called aeroplanes. In this country they say airplanes, but we call them aeroplanes. And we would say, I wonder if that's German or British. But we couldn't make out because it was so far up in the sky. But it didn't bother us, you know, because they weren't low enough, but they could have dropped bombs, which they did in Glasgow. They decimated Clyde Bank in Glasgow because that was a huge shipbuilding area, and the bombs would go off down there. But there was a bomb that was dropped at the end of Bellsdyke Road one time. And the sirens would go off periodically, and I remember being in the bathtub as Murray and my father was bathing us, and the sirens went off, and he grabbed us out of the bathtub and wrapped us in towels, and we ran up to the back green, which was the back of the house, was a garden, and then the back, and in the UK, the grass area was called the green.
Mm-hmm.
And it was always called the green, the front green and the back green.
Okay.
And here they say the front yard, why they call it a yard, you know, it was a mystery to me, but it was the back green, and that's where you hung your washing.
Right.
Because in those days they didn't have dryers. The outside air was dry, the dryer. And there was, in the back green, there was an air shelter. And it was corrugated steel that was kind of U-shaped and joined in the middle with big nuts. And you had to jump down into it. So I guess at one point they dug a hole and they put it in. And the Smiths next door shared the shelter with us. And they would always bring milk and cookies, biscuits as we called them. And, did you get that, Deirdre?
So anyways, you're saying about you were go in the shelter.
Right. And we would just sit there huddled, waiting for the all clear to go off. And then we could go back home. I didn't think that we would have survived a bomb if it dropped on us.
Right.
I don't really, I think the reason they built these was that the house was made of brick, and that we would have probably had a lot of injuries, whereas the steel thing, I'm not sure if
Right.
it survived the bomb either, but
Right.
we'd all be in one area, they could find
Right.
us. But that, everybody had an air raid shelter. But the Smiths didn't, because they didn't have any children.
Right.
Unfortunately for them, they lived next to us. and there were seven children in my family, so they didn't have any.
So tell me about your mom and dad. Tell me about first Cecilia. What was she like? And tell me about her.
My mother was a talker. She never stopped talking. She liked to talk, Cecilia. And she was a nurse at the hospital. And but during the war, my father...
What kind of hospital was it?
Well, during the war, it became what they called a base hospital, which the hospital was a mental hospital. But my father was trained as a psychiatric nurse. And because when it became a base hospital, it meant they treated the soldiers and the Navy, you know, the sailors and the Air Force men, that was used as a hospital. And so they weren't qualified to be a general nurse.
Right.
They were just qualified as psychiatric nurses. And there was always that division in nursing.
Mm-hmm.
In the UK, you know, Children's Hospital had, you qualified as a children's hospital nurse.
Right.
So that you know, it was separated. So my father had to go to some other hospital. I think it was in Barhead. Don't ask me where that was. And he was gone, and he would come home on his day off. So my mother was left with her brood.
Just her.
Just her. And well, the same with all the women in the street.
Now she was working too?
No, she didn't work as a nurse at that time, but being my mother, who liked to talk to adults mostly, she got a job collecting premiums, the premiums for life insurance. So my mother would go around I don't know where she went, but she went to all the houses and collected the money, because in those days, people didn't have checkbooks. You paid, everything was cash. So she would collect all the money for the premiums for the Prudential Insurance Company, I think she worked for, at the Pru, as they
Right.
called it. And as a result of that, Cecilia Patricia Gallagher Clark knew everybody.
Now, she knew everybody. Now, she was not born in Scotland, right? What was
She was
her
born
backstory, Mom?
She was born in Donegal, outside of Donegal, on a farm in Donegal. And she had one sister who was like 6 or 7 years younger than her,
You know what her name was?
Eleanor. And no, it was Ellen, I think. They didn't really get along for some reason. And from what I remember is, my mother's father died when she was 16, but he was like 65. So he was old when she was born.
Oh,
And so my mother left Scotland and went to stay in Glasgow with a relative that she knew, and he was a headmaster for a school in Glasgow. She went to live with those people. And then she started at Belsight Hospital to train as a psychiatric nurse. And she met my father there. And my father was a tall, blonde, good-looking guy. And Cecilia was 5 feet tall, with dark hair and blue eyes. And I think she grabbed onto him, basically. But
what did she look like otherwise?
she was a little plump. She never looked old. You know, my mother, like me, I don't think she never had a lot of lines in her face or anything.
Right.
The only problem she had was her hair would fall out. And my father said that when she was pregnant, her hair would grow in more. But afterwards, she had very thin hair. And in later years, she ended up wearing a wig because she had very thin hair. And that, she was always getting us to massage her head, hoping hair would grow, and she would have us check to see if there was any new growth in her hair. That was her biggest cosmetic, which of course for a woman is
Right.
very sad. And the thing is, we all got this most of us did got this very strong, thick hair. And so the only person who didn't was Patsy, who's had a problem with her hair. And Patsy had very curly hair. Half of the family had very curly hair, and the other had very straight hair.
Right.
So it was very interesting.
So tell me about the house how big was it
Well, we moved in. It was a new house. It was a 3-bedroom, 1 bath. It was typical of the houses
Sure.
built in those days. 1 bath. I don't know how we survived 1 bath. Living room and kitchen. And it had a big coal cellar in there too, and it didn't have central heating. It only had a fireplace in the living room where my father would light the fire in the morning, and the coal fire heated a boiler in the back, and that boiler heated the hot water, which I thought was quite ingenious when I think back about that. It did double duty, heated the house. And then the upstairs bedrooms had coal fires, except 1 bedroom, the small bedroom, which of course was delegated to the girls in the house. And the master bedroom was big, so my 4 brothers slept in the master bedroom, which had 2 beds in it, 2 double beds. and 2 boys slept in one bed and 2 boys slept. But in the small bedroom, 3 girls slept in one bed. So that when one wanted to turn over, we all had to turn over at the same time. So it was very funny, actually.
So tell me about your sisters.
Sister Mary,
And how was she?
she was 6 years older than me, and she was wonderful. She did a lot of mothering of me. She would curl my hair. She would these ringlets, which you never see today, but it was pieces of rag that your hair was wet, and they would twist the hair around and then twist the rag back up, and we would do this for special occasions. Like the month of May was a month for honoring Mary.
Right.
You know, Mary, what's the song? Oh Mary, we crown you with blossoms today, Queen of the angels and Queen of the May. We'd all get dressed up and we had flowers. We'd have a church function and we'd toss the flowers out, and it was a big deal, and we'd get dressed up in our dresses, fancy dresses. I'd have ringlets. Unfortunately, they didn't last very long because my hair is so straight.
Right.
So, but she always made sure that I would have my basket of flowers and my ringlets in my hair. My sister Mary did that. My sister Patsy, on the other hand, was always reading. And I always remember she always read sitting in front of the fireplace and with her legs like this, you know, spread out, sitting in front, hogging the fireplace and reading. And I remember, I must have been about 4 or something, and she's reading a book, because she was like 5 years. There wasn't much space between me and Patsy. And I said, "You're not reading because your lips aren't moving." I always remember that, because I thought your lips had to move when you're reading, because that's how when you're little like that, you always felt like to read, you read out loud, and so your lips moved.
Right.
I accused her that she wasn't really reading. But Patsy, although I don't want to say bad things about Patsy, but Patsy got out of a lot of things around the house. Because
why did she get out of a lot of things?
I don't know, because she would, I don't know if it was deliberate, but she would make a mess of things so that she didn't have to do it. Like if she had to cook dinner, or she would boil the potatoes. So what happened was it was like potato soup that ended up.
Right.
So it wasn't boiled potatoes you got.
Right.
It was this mess in a pot. So people didn't want her cooking. So I, being the stupid fool, would say, "Well, I can do a better job than that." And so I would do it. And I thought, wow, was I taken, you know? And so, and then Mary left, she went to nursing school, and then I had to do the ironing.
Who was doing the ironing? Oh, Mary had been doing
Mary did the ironing, and then I had to do the ironing, age 12. So all you grandchildren out there, don't feel sorry for yourself because you had to do housework, because believe you me, I had to do it.
So what kind of housework did you do growing up?
I cleaned the kitchen, I made dinners, I cooked and cleaned. And the other thing was, a coal fire, you had to dust every day, because when you're taking the ashes out, the ashes went everywhere. So the place had to be dusted and swept every day. We'd take the rugs outside and sweep them. And then one day my mother got a vacuum cleaner.
Oh, wow.
I think she was the 3rd person in the street to get a vacuum cleaner. But we had to take them out with a brush and brush them, and then sweep the floors. But The other thing was, remember, my mother, one of the things that was sort of, I've often wondered about this, in the kitchen we had what we called a boiler. And it was a big round cylinder thing. And it was very elaborate, stamped on the top. And it had a gas ring underneath.
Mm-hmm.
And my mother would boil the white linens, like
Right.
the sheets, your underwear, your undershirts, your vests, as we call them. And she would boil them. And,
Right.
and they would be all soapy, and the steam would rise,
Mhm.
and the water would run down the kitchen walls.
Oh, jeez.
It was very steamy.
Right.
We didn't get very many colds because it was very humid in that house. We didn't need a humidifier.
So tell me about your brothers.
Well, my older brother George, he was so much older, so
How much
I
older
really
was he?
didn't. Well, he was probably like 7 or 8 years older than me.
Okay.
So I really didn't have much contact with him. And then Mary, and then Patsy, and then Desmond. And then between Desmond and me, there was a baby who died when she was 3 weeks old. And she was born, I think I'm not sure when she was born, 1936 or something.
Right.
She died of septicemia, and in those days they didn't have penicillin, so she
Right.
only lived for 3 weeks. And I remember asking my mother years later, probably 40 years later, about, her name was Margaret Elmer, and she always would say to us, you know, next week Margaret Elmer would be 15. She would always remember her birthday. And she'd always say, kind of brings tears to my eyes, because I asked my mother about her. And I think about her, the pain she must have felt. I don't know why I'm weeping. The pain she must have felt in losing that baby. And she still remembered it all these years later. And she was just crying. And kind of sad. So I always felt that people who get abortions, I think they might feel the same way. I think they might think that if that was my child, if I had had that child, that baby would be 3 years old or 5 or something. And I think a lot of people think there's nothing to it, but I really think it must have some psychological effect on people. Because I know that when I worked as a nurse in maternity, that the hospital I worked at here in Bethesda, they always put the people who had miscarriages in the recovery room with people who had just babies. I thought it was the cruelest thing, because they had just lost their babies, and here it was, they were with these other people. I never understood that. So it was just kind of weird. But anyway, I don't know why I was crying then.
Well, I can understand why.
It was just my mother.
Yeah.
But, but she always remembered her. She always say, she's going to be 10. It was September 15th. We always remembered her.
How was your mom, how did she treat you all? Was she affectionate to you guys, or how was she as a mother?
She was good. I mean, there were 7 of us, and I think it was hard to raise 7 kids. And especially when, well, Desmond was probably gave her the most trouble.
Now, how much older was
Desmond was 3 years older than me.
Uh-huh.
And my mother had some, during the war, of course, we had a sideboard, and it was like, you know, cupboard and then drawers and a cupboard, but it was on legs,
Mm-hmm.
you know, legs. I always remember him swinging on one, and he had his leg behind him, hitting the wall, swinging back on this door, swinging, and then suddenly the whole thing fell, and the drawers all fell on, so that it stopped it completely falling on the floor. But all the dishes all came flying out, smashing their way out. And my mother was in the kitchen, and she just came out. And of course, our place of refuge was the bathroom. We all ran to the bathroom and locked the door. But my mother just stood in the kitchen and
Did Desmond make it?
Oh yeah, we all made it in there.
Uh-huh.
Well, we were very good at doing that, because that was the first place of refuge. It was out the living room into the bathroom and locked the door. And I think my mother just stood there weeping, because it was during the war,
Oh.
and factories weren't making fine china. I mean, when I think of Britain during the war, it gave us all. I mean, they took everything they could get. You know, there were shell factories, there were, you know, the people who had railings, and they would have little walls, and then they would have these fancy railings. They took all their railings, and you can still see today these walls with little squares where the iron was all cut. It was all for the wall, like the woods, all the trees were gone, except around the perimeter they left them. And so they were, you know, in Britain, they weren't making stuff, and everything was rationed. Everything was sort of clothes, everything was rationed, and you couldn't get things. And one thing my mother used to do, she'd go to this flour factory where they had big sacks of flour, and she would buy the flour sacks, and it would have stamped on it, whatever it was, Pillsbury flour, which it wasn't Pillsbury flour. But she would bleach it, and then she would embroider them and make pillowcases. So we always had embroidered pillows. In fact, the whole house was embroidered. My mother embroidered, because her family and her relatives in Donegal were in the embroidery business, and they used to embroider tablecloths and for the export to the U.S.
Mm-hmm.
And so she would, I can still see her sitting there embroidering. She never sat doing nothing. She always was darning. In the days when you darned socks,
Right.
you didn't throw out socks when you had
Can
a
you
hole.
explain to some people maybe watching this don't know what darning means?
Darning is, you've got, my father would get a hole in his heel
Of a sock.
of the sock,
Yeah.
or in the toe, you know.
Right.
And so what you got, yarn that was quite the color of the sock, well, mostly woolen socks. They didn't have cotton socks, and you made lines, you know, you went back and forth, and then you wove your needle through the yarn and back through, so that it was, you know, a pattern that you made.
Right.
And so it made it whole, and because you couldn't go out and just buy another pair of socks, because
No.
they weren't making stuff during the war.
No.
And I remember my mother got a piece of fabric and had poppies on it. No, it was plums. It was big plums. And she made a dress for me and a dress for another girl in the neighborhood, Margaret McNabb.
Uh-huh.
And we would plan to wear our dresses on the same day and pretend we were twins, which we weren't, of course, but people helped each other out during the war. And if my mother ran out of money, we had to always go to the co-op. But it wasn't a co-op down the village, it was a co-op near where the church was, St. Bernadette's.
Now, what's a co-op?
The co-op was a grocery store, but it was the Cooperative Society, which it's still there today, but it's not as prominent as it was during the war. And you became a member of the co-op. It's like any kind of co-op, you know, you become a member and you get a dividend from the profits.
Right.
And every quarter was a dividend. So as a kid, we always knew when dividend day. So I always knew about dividends, you know.
Right.
So so on dividend day, my mother would go shopping.
Right.
Come home with what she could buy with it, which was mostly underwear and stuff like that. It was never anything fancy or anything like that.
Right.
But it was, but things were very tight. People, somehow somebody got hold of Air Force blankets and made coats out of them, and then put little red pieces of fabric on the pockets
Uh-huh.
to make it look, you know, but they were Air Force blue.
Right.
And you know, people, they were ingenious at how they came up with how to do things.
Right.
And then, of course, when I think about it, you know, if anybody came to visit us, you know, we had ran out of China because 7 children broke up China. But they had enamel cups, and we call them tinnies. But some people would come to visit us, and of course we never knew if people were coming.
Mm-hmm.
And so my mother would send us to Mrs. Smith's next door, and Mrs. Smith next door would hand over her good china to us
Right.
to bring in, and so that my mother could serve tea
Right.
to these people in proper china.
Right.
And to the life of me, I don't know why the Smiths even gave us the china, because we could have dropped it and done anything, you know, but they did. The Smiths were wonderful neighbors. And I don't know how they tolerated the racket next door, because it wasn't a quiet house. It was a very loud house.
So tell me more about your brother. So you
My
tell me a
brother
little
Desmond.
about Desmond a little bit more, and then your
Desmond was Desmond, and he was very skinny. He was very thin. And the district nurse who would come around to periodically visit families thought we were starving him.
Really?
Yes, they thought.
And how old would you think he was at this time that they thought they were starving?
It was probably 6 or something.
Okay.
Or maybe 5 or something, I don't know. But he had a special tray that my mother had, and it had Ribena and all kinds of formulas to fatten him up.
Uh-huh.
But the truth of the matter, Desmond was stealing food. Desmond was...
So even with the formula...
It wasn't a formula, it was some liquid vitamin stuff, you know, and
Right. So he was eating his own food, he was having the supplements, and was he also stealing your food?
This is Desmond.
Okay.
We would sit down to dinner, and he would look at all around and he would say, he's got more than me. And he was always protesting about how much food somebody else had than
Right.
him. But he had the same amount as everybody.
Right.
And suddenly, during the war, everything was rationed. You got a pound of meat a week per person.
Right.
And that included bacon, sausages, any kind of
Right.
meat. So you divide that up, it's 2 ounces of meat
It's
a
nothing.
day. So we're talking about
Right.
beef stew, you got a little bit like that.
Yeah.
So, so there wasn't a lot of food. And so Desmond, and of course there was a shortage of sugar because we had to, Britain is a temperate climate, so it didn't grow it didn't grow tomatoes or peppers or anything like that. They were all hot house. And so because of the U-boats and the boats coming from other countries to bring us food like oranges and bananas, we never knew what oranges and bananas were.
Right.
They just weren't available. At Christmas time, maybe the grocery store would get a crate of oranges. Somehow they got some oranges for Christmas. So you would get an orange in your stocking.
Right.
Can you imagine for Christmas you're getting an orange in your stocking? And apples we had, because apples grow in temperate climate. Pears as well. But they only grow for a certain season. So in the wintertime, there wasn't a whole lot of vegetables available, except, rutabagas, carrots, and what we call root vegetables.
Right.
That lasted a long time. Potatoes. My father had a garden, of course, and he had a victory garden as well.
Okay.
And he planted a lot of stuff. He always planted potatoes, and they were the best potatoes. We'd go to fix dinner, you just go out and dig them up with a fork and dig up the potatoes. And they were very thin skinned, so you didn't peel them because the skin was so thin. And they were delicious. I mean, when you really see and taste those potatoes, you understand what, they talk about organic, we're having organic food today.
Right.
Well, that's what we had.
Right.
Up. But it was, my father would put lime on parts of the garden because it needed some acid or alkaline or whatever. But he grew a lot of stuff. The only thing he couldn't grow was carrots. Never had much luck. He didn't know why.
Really?
But so there wasn't a lot of food. And getting back to Desmond, there wasn't sugar, because sugar's imported. Sugar's a hot weather. You hear about. There was a program on tonight's TV about Cuba and this.
Right.
And they brought the slaves over to work the sugar plantation. And it's hot. Well, we didn't have sugar, so.
Right.
So my mother devised a plan that we would have each, in a jelly jar, we'd have our names on it with our sugar.
Okay.
So that you put a spoonful of sugar in your tea, you took it out of your own sugar jar.
Okay.
Well, for some reason, Desmond's remained full.
Okay.
But he was actually eating everybody else's sugar. He'd eat the sugar, a spoonful of sugar. He'd eat a spoonful of sugar. And he was eating all the sugar out of everybody else's. But his was full. And he's still the same. He still eats a lot. But he's never, one of the things I think that saved Desmond was he was always moving. He was like a monkey. That he never stopped jiving around. He just always moved along. And he always ate a lot. And to tell you if that's a gene or something, I don't know. But we had a reunion at Dunkeld House Hotel. And I had gut problems, so anyway, I wasn't eating a whole lot. And creme brulee came with the dinner.
Right.
And I took a spoonful of it, and I thought, oh, I can't eat that. His son Michael comes up to me and he says, "Aunt Eileen, are you going to eat that?" And I said, "No." He just picks it up and he starts eating it. And I thought, he's just like his father.
Yeah.
So Desmond ate a lot, and there's a family picture that was taken in 1946, and his legs are skinny, and they're kind of bandy, and I think that was the reason they thought that, he wasn't,
Sure.
and he would drink a lot of milk as well,
Right.
and so I don't know, he was just naturally thin,
Right.
and he's still not. He's never gotten fat.
Right.
He's got a little pot, like all the Clarks have pots.
Right.
But he never got fat, I don't think.
So tell me about Murray.
Murray was younger than me. I didn't really have a lot to do with Murray, for some reason.
How much younger was he than you?
18 months.
Okay.
And my mother spoiled him. Murray was...
Why do you think she spoiled him?
Well, because my father was gone. He was born in 1939.
Okay.
The war had started. Then the hospital changed. My father was gone. And she had this beautiful, blonde, curly-haired, blue-eyed baby who all he did was lie there and smile at her.
It's hard not to spoil that one.
And he was spoiled.
Okay.
So I think there was a resentment there about these, and even in later years, when we all had to get up to go to church on Sunday, Murray got to stay in.
He got to stay in?
He got to stay in and
go
to the 11 o'clock mass instead of the 9 o'clock mass. Now I ask you, we didn't get to do that, but Murray did. So we all knew that Murray was my mother's blue-eyed baby boy. So I think there was a little bit of a resentment about that. Not really resentment,
Right.
but it was okay,
And what treated your father?
My father and I were like this.
So
My father was a great guy.
Was he?
My-
What was he like? What was he?
He was quiet.
Uh-huh.
He liked to read. He was a reader. And Celia was a talker. So Celia talked all the time. My father sat there and read. And then there'd be an eruption upstairs, which I would cause. Because I'm left alone in the bedroom because my sisters are older and up and out or just out or doing something, I don't know. But I was alone, and 3 of them were in the front bedroom. So I'd go in and start a pillow fight.
Mm-hmm.
And so we'd be banging each other and carrying on, and you would hear downstairs my mother say, George, would you see to them? Can you see to them? George. And my father would try and ignore her. Finally, he couldn't stand it anymore. So he'd come up the stairs, and he'd rattle this set of keys that he used at the hospital.
Right.
Because everything was all locked up at the hospital. And it had a thin strap attached to a button on his pants. And we'd get under the covers, and he would whip the covers, pretending like he was whipping us. So Celia would hear, you bloody kids, will you keep quiet? Your mother's getting onto me. You stop this nonsense. Go to your beds. And so he'd go downstairs, and I'd go back to bed. But he one time he did it, and I pulled the covers, and he got me in the back, and it left a mark. I'd show everybody the mark my father left on me. He was very embarrassed.
Was he?
Yeah. He didn't mean it though, because it was my fault. I pulled the cover over.
Right.
And he hit me. But
Right.
he never hit us. He never hit us. My mother would smack us now and then,
Right.
but we deserved it. But my father never did. And so my father was,
Okay, Mom, so we're talking about
My
Desmond?
father.
Oh, your father.
yeah, and my father, one of the things my father always did, there was, as a child growing up, and we were going to school, and they always had the radio on, and there was a program that would say, they would come on at 5 minutes of 8, and it was Lift Up Your Heart. And it was a quote for the day from the Bible.
Uh-huh.
And we had to be at the door to go to get the bus to go to high school. This was high school when I was 12. We went to high school when we were 12. And lift up your heart. Desmond never quite made it out the door at that. He was always in the bathroom. And for some reason, he was always late for school for some reason.
Right.
Desmond hated high school. He did not like high school for some reason. I don't know why. But anyway, but my father, and one day every 2 weeks, both my parents were gone in the morning. They always worked different shifts, so that one of them was home.
So when did your mom go back, like, start working?
It was after the war.
Okay.
A few years after the war.
Okay.
She went back to work.
And was she working full-time, or?
Yeah,
Okay,
She
and your
worked-
dad was working full-time?
yeah, and so they, but there were different shifts, so
Okay.
there's always somebody home with us at night, in the morning. But one day, every 2 weeks, they were both gone, because they did a long day, what's it called, somebody did a long day.
Right.
So they were gone. But my father always made the porridge, which is oatmeal, from pin oats, not your rolled oats, garbage stuff they have here. It was the real stuff. And in the morning, if we got up, it was always ready. So it was always ready. And then, and the milk was delivered every day. And with the milk came a package of freshly baked breakfast rolls, which, when I think about it, was delicious.
Right.
So and sometimes, and we also had hens. My father had hens.
Oh, I did.
And in the woods, somehow he commandeered a part of the woods. And so we had hens. We were the only family that had hens. I don't know how he did it.
Right.
But and we had fencing high up, because they would fly up, and he would clip their wings so they would fly
They
up.
wouldn't- okay.
Because once they got out and got into somebody's garden, you know how hens
Yeah.
scratch?
Oh,
Oh, you couldn't let anything like that go in somebody else's garden, because
right.
they would shoot, if they had guns there, they would
Right.
shoot to kill. And so anyway, so we'd have half an egg sometimes. So I
Wow.
mean, when we were talking about
Were you
nutrition-
hungry a lot as a kid?
No, we weren't really hungry. We were used to that kind of thing.
Yeah.
You know? We weren't really hungry. And on Sundays, we could go across to what we call the petrol pump. It was a little gas station. It was called the petrol pump. And they had a little store there. And
Yeah.
they sold biscuits and sweeties and stuff.
Yeah.
Not much else. They didn't have anything else other than that. And they sold petrol. And the name was, the mother was Mrs. McVicker, and the daughter was Mrs. Wilson, and her husband was Mr. Wilson. I always remember that. We'd go, and we were always given some money, and we'd go over there and buy 2 ounces of sweeties. So 2 ounces. So we never built up this hunger for, which I see today, people eating a whole bar of chocolate, you know.
Right.
We didn't eat like that. I
Yeah.
mean, it was just, you know, you grow up eating, and to this
Yeah.
day, I never eat between meals, you know.
Right.
It's a rare thing for me to eat between meals, because we
Yeah.
never did, you know, because there wasn't anything
Right.
other than your meal.
Right.
What was our favorite meals? Well, we didn't have favorite meals because my mother wasn't much of a cook. My father was a better cook. My father would cook big pots of soup, and he'd always make this skirling. He'd make this stuffing thing into cups that didn't have handles, that were reused.
Okay.
And he'd mix oatmeal with chicken livers or something,
Uh-huh.
and he'd put it in with the soup.
Okay.
And it was covered with wax paper with a string around it. And then a piece of meat was put, you know, was boiled beef, and then soup, you know. So it was all one big pot of stuff. And so you would have the soup, and then you'd have a piece of meat and this scuttling.
Right.
So and you know, when we had that oatmeal, it filled us.
Sure.
And then we got school dinners, which were nothing to write home
You mean
about.
and that dinner in
That's-
Britain was at lunch?
Yeah.
Okay.
But they were nothing to
Right.
write home about. And we'd have beef stew one day, and mince the next, which is ground beef. And potatoes, it was just potatoes. And carrots and onions and the meat and the stew, basically was what it was. We didn't have a lot of veggies or, you know, any fancy vegetables or anything like that. We didn't have asparagus or, the things that we had, we grew. We had rhubarb
Right.
and blackberry. My father had blackberry with gooseberry,
Right.
which you can't find here. I don't know where they don't. They're very tart. So you'd have gooseberry pie, or you would
Right.
stew gooseberry. The other thing we had was prunes. This is what we had for dessert: bird's custard and stewed prunes. That was dessert. How would you like that? We didn't have chocolate cake
Right.
or anything like that as a regular dessert. We'd have rice pudding,
Right.
you know, baked in the oven, you know.
Right.
And so that was kind of things we would have. Food-wise, there wasn't a variety of things.
Right.
And so it was not. But during the war, during the war, the soldiers trained up in the Highlands because it's very hilly, and they trained up there, and they got a lot of training, you know, and parachuting, I guess, and whatever. But the tanks would pass, because our road was Bellsdyke Road, and it crossed the River Forth
Mm-hmm.
at Dunfermline, and so,
Right.
which was the bridge, the only bridge across the Forth.
Right.
Now they have a Forth road bridge. They had a Forth rail bridge, but they didn't have a road bridge. So they always came in front of us and went. So we'd always see the tanks and the soldiers. And one time they came, and of course our mothers, all the mothers would run out there with tea
Oh.
and toast
Sure.
and things, and give it to the soldiers. And one of the soldiers gave George an accordion, and he said, I won't be needing this." And you often wondered what happened to
Sure.
this. So, because I'm sure they were preparing
Yeah.
to go for D-Day or something, you know.
Right.
But he gave him an accordion to play.
Wow.
George would play the accordion. And but the soldiers often came and they left marks on the road.
On the road,
You know,
with the tank treads?
Yeah, the tank tread. And it was amazing because we were just happy to see them, you know.
Sure.
And it didn't have an impact as a war because we weren't really affected by bombing and destruction like London was or Glasgow.
Mm-hmm.
So in fact, we relived what happened. The people who lived in our neighborhood were from the Highlands, the Islands,
Mm-hmm.
Ireland, Northern Ireland,
Right.
and my father was from Aberdeen. And so we all got on very well. And when I talk to people, when we talk about our childhood, we always say, what a wonderful time we had. We really did. We didn't have much, you know.
Right.
We really didn't have, you know, for people who think material things brings happiness,
Right.
but we created a lot. We were very creative in what we did.
Right.
And we never played in the house unless it was pouring rain. And even then we'd play outside in our raincoats and our Wellington boots, you know, jumping in the puddles and stuff. But we were very happy. I mean, when I think about it, we had nothing really. We had a radio, and we would listen to, Monday night was always Dick Barton's Special Agent, and the street would clear.
Yeah.
Everybody was in there to listen to Dick Barton's Special Agent. And it was about, I don't remember really exactly what it was, but I suppose he was an agent for the Secret Service or something, you know. And, but we always listened to him. And then Saturday night there was a play on, so we'd listen to a play. And then BBC Home Service was classical music. So we grew up listening to classical music. Then BBC Home Service, and then later years, my brothers got into listening to more modern songs,
Mm-hmm.
and we'd get Radio Luxembourg, and they'd be turning the dial on this radio, and it would squeak, you know, squeak.
Sure.
And trying to, in just one little spot, you could get Radio Luxembourg, and you could get the latest music.
Oh, okay.
And but it was BBC Home Service, and then there was BBC Light program. And that was the only two stations they had. But I mean, we didn't miss anything. You know, there was plays we listened to, which were great. You know, when
Right.
you think about it, you know, do kids listen to plays today? I doubt it. They don't even. What I feel, the kids today miss is poetry.
Right.
They don't even get poetry, and I still remember.
What was your favorite poem when you were a kid?
I don't know what, you
Or
know,
like what-
the Laird of Copan, you know,
Mm-hmm.
it was one of them, and it was, you know, you think about it, you know. I still remember them, you know, some of the,
Right.
you know, the wee Cooper of Five. Now, I don't remember all the words. The next stop's Kirkcaldy. It's about this little boy taking a train to see his grandmother in Kirkcaldy, where they made linoleum. And he would say, I ken by the smell, the next stop's Kirkcaldy. Because you could smell the linoleum.
Mhm.
And apparently linoleum's coming back in because it's antibacterial.
Sure.
In hospitals, they're putting linoleum in. But anyway, and I don't think you guys got that much poetry growing up in school. And I always thought, you know, the songs, and some of the, you know, and some of the things that we learned that were kind of sneaking away is in the first grade we learned to do cross stitching,
Right.
which, when I think about it, why did we do that? But it was hand-eye coordination and colors,
Mm-hmm.
the different colors. And then it was like an 8x4 piece of cloth. It was, you know, for cross stitching.
Right,
And we would do all these, and and the teacher would then make it into money or change, and we'd give it to our mothers for Christmas.
Oh.
And then we made a lap bag, and we learned to embroider down the sides to put it together. And the next grade we learned to knit. Now, but it was kind of hand-eye coordination things that it's all missing today in school. I don't know what they do in school today.
right,
When they say, I don't remember any kid not knowing how to read.
right,
Even Eileen Anderson, who lived up the street, who was retarded. She wasn't totally retarded, but she was questionable,
right,
But she could read, and it was kind of like,
right,
why aren't these kids reading? I don't understand. If you're not reading by the end of the first grade, we went to school at age 5, and I don't remember learning to read because it was that early. But
Right.
I think at age, if you haven't learned to read by 7, I think they should have a special group for them
Yeah.
to teach them how to read, because if you can't read, it makes your life very hard.
let me check on the camera. All right, so anyways, you're saying, and she got 100 pounds, and was that a lot of money?
Well, it was in those days, in 1946, £100.
Right,
But for her, she didn't think it was enough, because her sister, she only had one sister,
right,
had sold the farm, her farm, that belonged to my mother. My mother's mother died during the war, and my mother couldn't go to Ireland because of the war,
right,
because she didn't go across the sea
right,
because of the German U-boats and
right,
and Ireland remained neutral during the war.
right,
It was not involved in the war, but a lot of Irish joined the British Army.
right,
But my mother's sister sold the farm. It was rented out to other farmers to make money. And,
Right.
But unbeknownst to my mother, her sister sold the farm.
right,
I remember my mother weeping and saying, "You never sell your land. You never sell your land. You always hold on to your land." And for the Irish people, they had been tenant farmers for hundreds of years. The land was owned by the English, and they'd been tenant farmers. And there's a long history of the tenants being thrown off the land and all that. So now, how did my mother acquire the land? How did her mother, father? I have no idea. She never talked about it.
Do you know, what's your mom's parents' names? Do you know? Your grandparents' names?
My grandfather was Cornelius Gallagher.
And your grandmother?
I don't know what her name was.
Okay. And what was the town again that she was from?
It was outside Donegal. It was just outside of the town of Donegal.
Okay,
And we went there a number of years ago with Desmond and his friends and we saw the house, but it had completely fallen down.
right,
And I guess people had taken the stones, and it just had caved in,
Sure.
It hadn't been lived in for 40 years or anything like that, but it had fallen down. And, it was sad, because for her it was important to always keep your land. But the other thing was, suddenly she had some money. So she bought herself a nice tweed suit. I got a new dress, and Muddy got a new shirt. These were bought things just after the war, which was,
Right.
I mean, things had been difficult during the war to buy anything. And so, so we were taken to this studio portrait, and we had a family picture taken. And it was the only time we ever had a family portrait taken, the one time. None of us are smiling, and a lot of the old pictures I've got of previous family portraits of the Clarks, no one I guess in the old days, you just stood there, you never said cheese and smile.
Right.
Nobody smiled, they all were just like this, you know. And we were the same, you know. And my father was kind of looking, and kind of looked funny, and he had Brandon on his knee. Brandon was 2, because he was born in 1944. And so she had a little bit of money that gave her some ability to do something. What else she did, I don't know. But it was sad for her.
Right.
But she got over it, you know.
So tell me about Brendan.
Poor Brendan. He was the baby of the family. He was, 5 years younger than Murray. And
How much younger than you?
6.5
Okay.
years. And so he kind of went to school by himself because he went to school with Murray for a short period of time. But Murray was so much older.
Right.
So Brendan was always kind of the lonely kid, the little one. And unfortunately, our greatest memory of Brendan was the table for dinner. There was only room for 8 people.
Uh-huh.
And so Brendan had to stand on a chair at this sink, the board, and he always had a dishcloth around his neck, and he would stand there and eat his food because there was no room at the table for Brendan, which was the beginning of what I think was his isolation from the family. It was almost like he was, and it didn't strike me then, there was no room at the table. And he had to stand there, and everybody remembers that picture of Brent. And he went to high school by himself, and by the time we were all out and gone, and so he was just left alone with my parents.
Right.
Who were working. And he was kind of lonely, I would think, although I've never talked to him about it. And of course, the kids in the street were all my age or older.
All right.
And there was very few younger ones.
Because you all moved in at the same time.
We all moved in 1939.
And you had new kids.
And
Yeah.
they had kids then, and there was very few younger kids that I remember. So there wasn't, when I grew up, we had tons of kids on it. We had never any shortage of friends. I remember all the kids. I can name every kid on that street. Agnes House and Joe House, and the Dixons had no kids, and then the next one was John Bain. And the next one was Evelyn Convery, and the next ones were Mary and Jessie McLean, the next one were McNabbs, Chrissy McNabb, Angus McNabb, Colin McNabb, and Margaret McNabb. The next one were the Brainians, Peter, Joan, and Hazel. The next one were the Youngs, Tony Young, Kathleen Young and Marion Young, and then us, the Clarks.
Right.
The Smiths had no kids. then the McDonalds, and there was Alistair, Lillian, and Ian, and then the Taylors. They were Robert Tabor, Mary Tabor, Margaret Tabor, and Jimmy Taylor, Taylor. And next to them there was a couple they called Phillips, and I think her name was Janice. She was much younger than us. Then the Dixons, who were crazy. The Sammy.
Why were they crazy?
Well, they all had mental issues, I think, in adulthood. I think Sammy was okay, and Jimmy Dixon. This is all before he worked at the hospital, but he was stealing drugs, which was so alien to us. He was taking drugs out of vials and putting water in,
Oh.
which was so not like the drug culture today, which was kind of weird.
Yeah.
But anyway, Jimmy Dixon, Larry Dixon, and Sammy, and what was the youngest one's name? The little one, Johnny Dixon. Then the next one were the Trails, Ian Trail and Roddy Trail, which I had a big fight with. Next to them was Anne Mackay, whose father had TB. So during the war, because her father had TB, she was allowed to get orange juice in a bottle. She was the only kid in the street who was allowed, from the government, who was allowed to get orange juice. Because her father had TB.
So you were a little jealous of someone whose dad is TB. Isn't that funny?
Well, she got
Sure.
orange juice. We never saw an orange, you know. It was kind of like, whoa.
So tell me, who was your best friends that you had growing up?
Mary McLean.
And where did she
And
live?
She lived a few houses out.
What was she like?
She was very good, and her parents were very nice. Her parents were from the island of Lewis. No, they were from Uist.
How do you
Which
spell
is an
that?
island. UIST.
Okay.
And it was an island. And Mr. Lackey McLean, I would go there and knock on the door and he'd say, "Island, how are you, Island?" He always called me Island. And they spoke Gaelic.
Oh.
Yeah, a lot of them did. They spoke, and her mother and father would speak Gaelic between each other. They didn't want the kids to understand what was saying.
Huh.
And
Because that's how it was spoken on the islands.
Yeah. It was. And so, and I always remember I would get invited for tea, for high tea.
And what's high tea, Mom?
High tea is the evening. You know, if you ate dinner at noon or 1, you would have high tea now. And Americans get confused about, they think high tea is afternoon tea. It's kind of some highfalutin thing.
Right.
But it's not. High tea is like something fried up, or, you know, it's more like a lunch thing, you know.
Okay.
And so high tea is, afternoon tea is where you have tea and cake and cookies and small little tiny sandwiches. That's afternoon tea.
Right.
And Americans get confused. But anyway, they at one time had tongue, which we never had. And the idea of eating a beef tongue, which you can still find some places. And they also had ketchup. They called it tomato sauce, but it was Heinz's tomato ketchup.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the first time I had ever touched that,
Wow.
tasted it. And it was kind of amazing to me.
Wow.
This red stuff.
Sure.
It was just weird.
Yeah.
But this awful, I mean, it didn't look like a tongue. I mean, it's just a piece of meat. But it tasted weird.
I can imagine.
And I thought, tongue. I can't imagine. And I'm thinking of somebody's getting a tongue taken out and cooking it. And, you know, when you're a kid, you
Sure.
imagine all kinds of things. But anyway, then there was the McGilverys.
Well, tell me more about Mary McLean
Mary McLean.
and yeah, because
Well, we would play together. Margaret McNabb, Kathleen Young, Hazel Branyan, Agnes Harrison. We all played together as girls.
So
We'd play across the wood.
Oh, would you? Now tell me of your favorite adventures with the girls.
We would go across the wood. We built this, we would, you think of entertaining yourself. We gathered sticks and planted them in the ground in a circular thing. Then and of course, the trees had all been knocked down. So there was high grasses. So we gathered all the high grass and we wound it in and out the stick. And we made a kind of hut. And the boys were always spying on us. We hated boys.
And how old were you at this time?
I have no idea. 8, 9, 10. I don't remember the age.
Right.
Or maybe 12, I don't know. But we hated boys because they were always trying to destroy our stuff. And so we had built this, and they came, like an army of them came, and they knocked it all down. They plundered it. And I was so angry that I went to running through the woods was a sewer, as we called it, a sewerage burn, which is a burn.
And what was this, an open sewer?
Open sewer. It was orange.
And where was this coming from, do you think?
The hospital. So this thing must have been totally polluted.
Oh my God.
And
I couldn't imagine what was in there.
yeah, no. Why it was open, I have no idea. But I guess when they built the hospital, century before or wherever, this was accepted. It was just going through the woods. There was no houses around, And it was quite all right. But once they tore all the trees out, So I went there and I got a bucket and I scooped up all this, you know the word for it.
Right.
And I threw it at Roddy Trail. And I got right in the smacker. And he's covered with all this orange.
Oh my God.
And he ran after me. But at that time, unlike today, I could run. And of course, the woods was full of small bushes and stuff. And I used to jump over these, run. Run. He was kind of heavy a little bit.
Uh-huh.
He was taller and heavier and more muscular, but I could fly. And I flew, and I got to the small road in front of our houses, and I saw his father coming up the street. Well, it scared the devil out of me. So I ran behind the houses, and I started jumping over their fences that separated the house. They had these short fences, jumping over the fences. And as soon as he saw his father, he started crying. And I thought, oh, what a weasel. Really. He didn't cry until he saw his father. He said, Eileen Clark threw sewage at me. And I was laughing. But I finally got home. Nothing ever happened. I got payback for all of it. Because we would put on cotton, at the very back of the woods, down where the piggery was, and the byres, we called it the byres, the barn for the cows. There was a field with a shed, but it was sloped.
Uh-huh.
And we would put concerts. This was our stage. And we'd put on concerts, and we'd do singing and acting and plays. No one taught us how to do this, I guess it was sort of primitive. I don't know, no one. I suppose in school we learned about plays and stuff, and so we would put on a play. And then there was another thing we used to do. There was at the very end of the street where Grant's, now the Grant house had a brick area shelter. Why, I don't know, but it was in the woods.
Uh-huh.
And there was one brick missing. But we used that as our dressing room for changing our clothes to put on a performance. And the boys would try to peek in this one space where the brick was missing, to see us getting undressed. So always remember, girls, that men and boys are always looking to see if they can get one over the women, to see them in their nakedness. So, I mean...
Well, that's not true.
It's part of their nature that they will try. I mean, I always wonder why men go to these clubs to see these women dance and naked, almost naked. But I can understand from birth, it seems that they have this instinct to do this. But anyway, we would then go out and perform on this platform tree. We called it the platform tree. And it must have been 6 feet in diameter. Can you imagine?
And it was cut, it was sawed off?
It was sawed off.
It was a really old tree.
It must have been hundreds of years old.
Oh.
And it was this big, and we use it as a platform.
Stage.
And Margaret McNabb would get up there and sing, ah! The boys would be in the audience, and they would throw tomatoes and throw stuff. And she'd go off crying. It was terrible. They were mean. Boys were mean. Boys can be mean. But anyway, we managed. We had a lot of fun. We played hockey on the street. Now the street was a private street. The main street was Bellside Road, which was, outside of the street.
Right.
It was an inner street, and we would play hockey, and nobody had cars. There was only one guy who had a car, and he could only use it on Sunday because petrol, I think he got a gallon of petrol a week, or something, and he only used it on Sundays because there was no petrol.
Right.
It was all, everything was for the war effort.
Right.
And even the funny thing was, we lived out in the country, but every day the butcher came,
They would come to your street in their
come
trucks?
to our street, yeah, and it was even driven by horses
Okay.
during the war, and the butcher came, the vegetable man came, the fish man came Wednesdays and Fridays. The grocery van came Tuesdays and Saturdays.
And the grocery van, tell me what would be on the grocery van, or how did that work?
What?
Tell me about the grocery van. How was that work?
It had cornflakes and dry goods. It was dry
Uh-huh.
goods. They didn't have any, flour,
Sure.
tea, sugar, the essentials kind of thing.
Mhm.
And the bakery came every day. Different bakeries came. They took turns in days. And I thought, wow, that's amazing, because we didn't have to, although we had to go to the grocery store for some things, but they did come. But you had to be home to buy all that stuff.
Right.
But it's amazing how lucky we were that this was available to us.
Right.
Because it was quite a distance to go to the village.
And you didn't have a car. You couldn't just pop in your car and drive all the.
Oh no, you could go on your bicycle. And I learned to ride my bike through my father's. My father had a man's bike, which was very tall. My
Right.
father was tall. And I learned to go through the bar. My leg would go through, and I learned to ride the bike. Let me get my hand up. Through the side and kind of tilt myself up,
Yeah.
and my leg through, because the bar would be about here on my,
Sure.
and I learned to ride his bicycle that way, which I think is kind of weird. And you think, how could I do that? But you just
Adapt.
did what you just didn't give up. You just
Right.
tried to do things,
Right.
We never, it wasn't like, oh, poor me, I don't have a bike, and, just go on with it, and,
So what was the
but
date?
it was we had a lot of fun as kids, and even when I speak to people, and we thought, wow, we were lucky, we had so much freedom, even though there was a war going on, and we were deprived. I mean, we didn't have candy and, sweeties and chocolate bars and nothing like that. We just, but it didn't, well, everybody was in the same position, so.
Right.
But we were very creative in our play, and we had a radio, which I've touched on before, and it was the BBC, which I love the BBC. I think of all the radio stations and TV stations, they have the greatest programs.
Mm-hmm.
When I record some of them, and it's different from Hollywood, in as much as the Hollywood tend to have the beautiful people,
Right.
but the British have the ordinary people as stars.
Right.
They're plump, or they're not beautiful faces. There's a program on called the Bletchley Women, and it's wonderful because here during the war, women were employed in a lot of secret things, but after the war, they weren't employed anymore. But a lot of these women were very bright women from Oxford and Cambridge.
Right.
And the Bletchley Circle was the house that uncovered the German code,
Right.
and from Hitler,
Right.
and they were able to break it. And this is a story about what these women did after the war. They were now married,
Right.
or they were employed with someone. One of them was employed. But it's a mystery thing. But none of them are beautiful people, or
Right.
they're very ordinary. And it's very comforting to watch that, whereas a lot of American shows kind of miss the mark
Right.
on that. They always have to be kind of weird, or are beautiful, and most people aren't beautiful.
Right.
When you really look around, people aren't aren't like these movies, like Marlon Monroe,
Right.
or, you know, they're just not.
Except your son.
Yeah.
Right.
well,
So
that's obvious.
getting back to you now, tell me your like when you were going on to like when you're a teenager.
Yeah.
Give me like a day in your life as a teenager.
Well, we went to school. We traveled 12 miles.
How'd you get to school?
Well, we had to walk to the village to get, or we'd sometimes go further along the street and got the bus up the Trice Road to a stop where they would pick us up. It was a special bus, special.
Uh-huh.
They would take us to St. Ninians, which was just next to Stirling, to the Catholic high school. And we went to the Catholic high school. So that took us, you know.
What was the name of the Catholic high school you went to?
St. Moden's High School.
How do you spell that?
S-T, period,
Uh-huh.
M-O-D-A-N-S.
Okay.
St. Moden's High School. It's still there today, only it's moved from St. Ninians into Stirling, into an area that used to be a very poor area in Stirling, where they knocked down all the houses and they built a new school. And apparently it is one of the highest performing schools
So how was
in
it?
the area.
How
But
was it back
it
then?
wasn't the highest performing when I went there, I don't think.
So what were you like as a high schooler, Mom? What were you like as a?
I was okay. I wasn't brilliant. by
Uh-huh.
any means. But I enjoyed it. I had a lot of friends there. But they were never in my neighborhood.
Right.
That was the unfortunate part. Some were from Kilsyth and Stirling and Bannockburn, so you never saw them after school.
Right.
You just saw them at school. And I played hockey, field hockey.
Did you?
Yeah, and I used to go all over, get the bus all over and play hockey. And I loved playing hockey. I was on the first 11 hockey team.
And what position did you play, or
Oh, I don't even, a left wing, I think.
left wing?
Yeah.
Did you score any goals?
Yeah. I love to hit that puck. It was a lot of fun. I mean,
Yeah.
it's a lot of, get it. But then, and as kids too, we used to play hockey on the street.
Also, you had some experience.
Well, what we had was shoe polish tins.
Yeah.
And we filled them in mud and sealed them, and that was a puck. And the hockey sticks were old golf clubs. You know, because, let's face it, Scotland always had golf.
Sure.
And in fact, we had we used to go through the golf course to get to the village. So people had old golf clubs that we used to play hockey on the street. That was another thing we played. We played rounders, which is like baseball here.
Yeah.
But we called it rounders, and it was a girls' sport. So baseball isn't very interesting to me.
So at this time when you're in high school, so who was your? How about boys?
No, we didn't have much to do with boys.
Yeah.
No, and this whole prom thing that they have here,
Uh huh.
I think, what a waste
Were
of
you
money.
not sweet on any boys?
No. Yeah, I liked Alexander Sim,
Uh huh.
but he didn't even know I existed.
I see.
Yeah, it's always like that
Sure.
in high school. You like a guy, he doesn't know you exist.
So
So, but that was okay.
what were you thinking about your life in high school? Like, what were your plans after high
I
school?
wanted to be a nurse. My mother wanted me to be a school teacher.
Uh huh.
The reason being, she says, you get the summers off, and you get the holidays off. You know, and being a nurse is very hard work, and you don't get paid very much. So you're better off being a teacher. But I really wanted to be a nurse.
Why did you want to be a nurse?
I don't know, I just wanted to be a nurse.
What appealed to you about it?
Huh?
What things in nursing seemed to appeal to you?
Helping people, being good to people, you know,
Right.
just being nice and helpful. Of course, it was different back then. This was 1956.
So when did you graduate? So you graduated high school in 55 or?
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
And then in 56, I went to nursing school and
Where'd you go to nursing school?
Stilling Royal Infirmary School of Nursing. I've got a bronze medal from there.
What's that mean, a bronze medal?
Well, it's from graduating from.
If you graduated, you got a bronze medal?
Yeah, yeah, and it's got your name on it, you know.
Okay.
In my jewelry box. And then if you passed your state boards, you got a silver thing, you're a certified general nurse.
Okay.
They divided up nursing into various psychiatric, general nurse, pediatric, you know, so
Mm-hmm.
it was different.
And you were a general nurse?
A general nurse, an RGN. So here they have RNs, RGN.
Mm-hmm.
So if you were a registered general nurse, you couldn't work in the mental hospital
Right.
because you weren't trained in the psychiatric.
So tell me about nursing school. How was that like?
It was, well, my friends were Sandra Fleming, Sheena Rose, and Betty Shaw. And unfortunately, Sheena and Sandra got married. Sandra met her husband when we were training to be midwives up in Aberdeen Maternity Hospital. She met her husband there. He was an architect. And unfortunately, they came down, before I came to this country, they came down to see me off a couple of weeks before I was leaving. And we all stayed at Sheena's house. And then the Sunday, they went out. John Morgan was his name, Sheena's husband, Sandra's husband. And his friend had bought a new yacht, and they all went out in a yacht. Unfortunately, around Scotland, there's gale force warnings, and you would hear all the time on the news. They would have the weather, and they would say gale force warning, different areas, you know. And unfortunately, that's what happened, and their yacht was smashed to pieces and their bodies were washed up on the shore, which was really very shocking.
Right.
Because Sheena called me at work and told me that the paper said Aberdeen architect and his wife found washed up on the shore, and it was like they had come down to see me.
Wow.
I felt very guilty. They didn't have any children. They'd only been married for about 9 months. And then Sheena married her Huey Brown, and she died a few years ago. She had terrible, terrible rheumatoid arthritis. Her hands were all gnarled. And she had gone into the hospital to get a gallbladder out, and she had a heart attack and died. That was just a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
So Betty Shaw, we lost contact altogether. We tried to find her. I tried to find her and we couldn't find her.
So you guys
So
were
all
pretty
my
close,
friends-
and so tell me about when
We
you
were
got.
just very close. We used to go to dances. we studied together, we'd go to dances, we'd go to the Golden Line.
What's the Golden Line?
Golden Line's a hotel in Stirling. But they would have, the cricket club would have a dance, the rugby club would have a dance, and we'd go there and pick up men.
Sure.
No.
Did you have any sweethearts?
Oh yeah.
Who was your favorite?
I would date different guys.
Yeah? Did you have a favorite?
Not really, you know. I never really found one I really, you know, I did date a lot of guys.
What did you do when you go out on a date with these guys? What would you do?
We'd go to the movies or go dancing.
Uh-huh. Right.
You know, I don't know.
And so then you decided then, so you were RGN, then you wanted to be, tell me about,
Midwife.
how did that occur?
Well, if you wanted to advance in your career, you did more things, you know, so so we decided to go to Aberdeen for midwifery. And it was part of the hospital center, but it was off by itself, the maternity hospital itself was off by itself, but it was one of the finest hospitals I've ever worked in. It was just amazing. What I learned there was the most important thing was the patient, and it was almost your nose rubbed in it. The most important thing was the patient. And that no matter what, we want these patients to leave here in as best condition as we can possibly can. And they would come around, and it was so different from obstetrics here, because it was midwives doing the deliveries, and we didn't. And I was surprised when I came here and started having you. And
Right.
how different it was. It was very male-dominated here, where it was, and I think traditionally it had always been a women's field, you know. But in the beginning of the century, a change had taken place because there was a lot of maternal deaths. And of course this is before penicillin and all that, and before they knew what they were doing. And so in Britain and in Europe, they decided to train the midwives. In this country, they decided to get rid of the midwives, because the midwives weren't trained. So they started up a college of midwives to train midwives. And in Aberdeen, they really trained you. They really did a great job. And the Professor Baird would come around. Now, what would you do if this happened? And what would you do next? And how would you do this? And the unit, the patient stayed in the bed in the labouring room, and we never moved them to a delivery room and put you on a operating table like they did when I had you, which was just a weird thing. You had to be delivered on a
Right.
operating table, whereas we always had a bed that could split in two, and it could go underneath it, so in case you needed to do a forceps delivery, and the stirrups would come out from underneath and come up. But they didn't have that here. If you were about to deliver, they took you to an operating room, which I thought was kind of stupid,
Right.
but the people all around me here thought I was kind of stupid.
Right.
And God forbid that anybody ever delivered a baby in a bed. I mean, it was like, oh, the crime of the century.
Sure.
And I thought, in all humanity, they've been having the babies on a dirt floor.
Sure. So now you
So-
got your midwifery degree.
Well, I know
Or-
that the first part was in Aberdeen, and
Uh-huh.
they were so good. If they had field distress, they had 3 minutes to get that baby out.
Right.
And they would bring it out. We had an operating theatre, 2 operating theatres at the end of the unit, and we'd bring the table around, put the patient on, run back, and they would be ready to open them up and get that baby out. And it was the fastest. And when I was having Deirdre, they said, we're going to do an emergency C-section. Half an hour later, I'm still waiting. And
Wow.
by that time, I was ready to push her out. And I thought, oh dear God. And I don't want to be critical of the American.
Well, let's get back a little bit because we
Right.
don't want to
Yeah.
jump ahead here.
But anyway, so we did our first part,
Yeah.
and we all passed the test.
Right.
But to be a midwife, you had to. In Aberdeen, they didn't do very many home deliveries, so you had to go to someplace else to do some home deliveries. So, because Aberdeen surrounding had a lot of rural areas, and they didn't take the chance.
And what year was this about, Mom?
This was 1961.
Right.
Yeah, 60 to 61.
Okay.
So then we went to Glasgow. And this, unfortunately, we didn't investigate this. We were stupid. This nurse told us to go to Oak Bank Hospital in Glasgow. It's a wonderful place. Go to that place. And so we took her word at it. We never checked it out. It was a worse place. It was built in Victorian times, and it looked it. We all met on the train, got there. We didn't even want to get out of the cab. We just thought, oh my God. It just looked something in
Right.
Victorian. And so we didn't. We did our 6 months. We did their home deliveries. It was very funny because it was a poor area, and I had never seen such poverty as I'd seen. It's like the program on the TV, Call the Midwife. It was the Gorbals, and the Gorbals was a very poor area.
How do you spell that? Do you know?
Gorbels, Gorbals.
Okay.
And up Maryhill Road, and it was very funny. And actually, it was, it was a community. And I think when you look back, it was a very vibrant community. They were very poor.
Like, how were they poorer than you? Like, you guys didn't have a
Don't
lot.
stick that in your ear.
No.
Well, we weren't poor.
Right. So how were they? How would you tell us like that they're poor?
Well, they weren't work. They didn't have a job,
Okay.
and they were on the dole, or they drank a lot.
Okay.
And they were, they gambled and they drank and they did things that we hadn't experienced.
Okay.
As kids, as growing up, we grew up.
So you would go and work that area for home deliveries?
Yeah. And it was very different. And one of the things that always amazed me was we'd always bring a box of stuff that was especially for the home delivery. And I'm a very curious person. I would want to know what's in
So you would
that
deliver it, to clarify, you would bring this to their
Yeah.
house or apartment,
But it was near delivery time.
before they deliver it, and it would
Yeah.
sit there.
Right. Not one ever opened that box. We told them not to open it, but not one. But for me, I think
I know. Me too.
I want to know
Take a peek.
what was in it.
So tell me about one of these home deliveries. Do you
Well,
remember? Was
it
there
was-
any one that stands out in your mind?
Not really. They're just all.
So what would happen?
Well, the midwife would come, and we would go with the midwife, and we would just be there with the mother, and they would take the kids someplace else, and the husband would be in another room, and we'd walk around with her and help her, and soothe her. And we'd also had gas and air and trialing, which we brought with us.
And what were those for?
And those are for pain, and so they could breathe it in near the end, when it was
Right near. Okay.
and they would breathe it in. But unfortunately, or fortunately, if they got kind of woozy, they couldn't hold it up, so it would fall away. So, which was a good thing. But we would deliver them, and we'd bathe the baby, dress the baby, and give it to the mother, and clean up, and then we would visit her every day for 10 days, make sure she was breastfeeding, and everything was okay, and check her, make sure she was all right. And then after the 10th day, the district nurse was then responsible for her. So it was a good system.
Mm-hmm.
So the mother wasn't left without somebody coming to see her for 10 days. And you
Right.
went for 10 days to see her. And it was a lot of fun. And sometimes I would get a cab to take you to the place and meet the midwife there. But sometimes we would get there and they would shout out the window, "You're too late, the baby came." So, which, some people are very lucky, they can go into labor an hour or so later, they're delivering,
Right.
So, babies find their way out, it's not like it's rocket science.
Yeah.
There's a way, the mechanism of labor, which we learned, and the maneuver, and I always think it's marvelous because how babies maneuver themselves in and out of the pelvis. It's just amazing how they're able to do that, but they do.
Right.
And but we didn't like Oak Bank Hospital. So as soon as our 6 months was up, we left,
Uh-huh.
and they were appalled because most people stayed until they got the results of their exams, but we didn't.
So where did you go then?
While waiting, we did district nursing. We worked for an agency doing different
I
things.
see.
And then Sheena was getting married and Sandra was getting married, so I went home and worked in Falkirk, in District Royal Infirmary in maternity,
So what were you feeling about your life at that point?
Well, I was thinking, I hadn't met anybody I wanted to marry,
Yeah.
My two friends had met some, so did Betty Shaw. She met someone, she married somebody.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, I just don't want to marry anybody, so I thought.
Did you feel pressure to be married?
No, I didn't. I didn't want to marry just for getting married.
Right.
I just thought, I don't want to marry someday. It just didn't appeal to me.
Right.
So I thought I might go to Africa.
Why did you think that instead?
Well, because it was 1962 or 1961. And a lot of the Brits went out to the colonies,
Mhm.
And really, when you really think of the British influence and all the colonies, and they went to Africa, and
But what prompted you? I mean, like you know, Scotland was your home, is where you grew up.
yeah.
And then what prompted you to say, yeah, I want to leave the country? What was
Well, it was like, I felt I could be helpful, you know, to the women out in the bush, you know.
Right.
You know, because the woman who wrote the textbook for midwives was Margaret Miles, and she had been in different countries in Africa opening maternity units.
Oh.
And I thought, well, maybe that would...
Did that inspire you?
Yeah, and I thought, that's something I could do for a few years, go out there and do something worthwhile.
Right.
You know? And I had grown up near Falkirk, and I was back in Falkirk, and it didn't really interest me to be there anymore. I wanted to go and do something. I wanted to experience something different. But unfortunately, Africa at that time was going through a crisis. And the crisis was they were trying to be their own countries.
Right. They were going through all those independence movements in the early 60s,
Yeah.
right?
And there was a lot of upheaval, there was a lot of problems, and, you know, so my mother said, you know, they're all coming home and you're going there, maybe you should wait. So I thought, oh, maybe I'll wait a year. I thought I'll wait a year, things will calm down. You're so stupid when you're young. I mean, you really are stupid. You see the world differently. But anyway, I thought, well, what will we do? And this other girl who worked at Falkirk, I said, I'd like to do something too. And so we decided we'd go
What
to
was her, do you remember her name?
Jean Reynolds.
Uh-huh.
And so we decided we'd maybe come to New England.
Okay.
And
Well, why New England? Or why America?
well, it was safe, we thought. When I think about it,
Right.
it was not safe. But anyway, the shooting every night went on. But anyway, we kind of looked up in the encyclopedia. You know, we didn't have what they have today. You know, GPS and Google Map or Wikipedia or, you know, any information. So we went to Boston. And we always thought, you know, the American tourists that we heard about, you know, everything was big and
Have you ever, up until that time, had you ever met an American?
No.
So tell me about how were you actually able to come over were you getting a work visa? Was the United States
Yeah.
allowing
Yeah.
nurses, like, you could just come over? And what was it, a temporary work visa?
No. You had to apply for a visa. And so we went to the American consulate in Edinburgh. And they said to us, well, you can get a work visa for a year, but you'd better get a green card, because if you stay over one day over a year, you'll get deported.
Okay,
And we figured, well, one day, I mean,
right.
we thought we were going for a year, but we'd like to do a little travel afterwards.
Sure.
So we thought, well, we'll get a green card. So, you know, they needed nurses here.
Okay.
So we got a green card and off we went. And,
Had you been on an airplane? Now, you flew over here.
yeah,
You'd never been on a plane before.
Uh-uh.
How was that like?
it was fine. It was all right. It was. I always remember I had this nice suit on. People dress in these days, you know. and
You're
they
dressed
dress.
up for the flight,
Well, people dress.
Yeah,
Today
sure.
people don't dress. I mean,
right?
you know. In fact, I went to the doctor a few weeks ago. And Dad had on his, you know, his jacket and stuff. I mean, I had on this jacket. And he says, oh, you're all dressed up. And I thought, but this is what we normally wear when
Right.
we go out. But I guess people don't dress up anymore, you know?
Sure.
But anyway, what were we talking about? Oh,
Your impression. So you came.
so we came here.
And where did you land? You landed in.
We landed in Boston, in Logan Airport, and we were met by some of the nurses from the Lemuel Shattuck Hospital, and who happened to be Irish. A lot of Irish nurses there. And we didn't have any money, American money. And so this guy grabbed my suitcases, but these nurses were picking us up and taking us back to Lemuel Shattuck, you know.
Mhm.
And so this guy grabbed my suitcases and then put them in the car, and I gave him 2 half-crowns, and he got mad and he threw them on the floor because it was English money. And I thought, But we hadn't thought of changing money because we were going to be met by people, and we could go to the bank the next day and change money.
Sure.
Because we brought money with us.
Right.
And so that was not a good impression. Then the next day, we take the train into Boston, and we didn't know where a bank was. So in Britain, when you don't know something or something, you always ask a policeman. So we saw this policeman, of course he had guns, which was kind of scary because policemen in Britain didn't have guns.
Right.
And we said, we're looking for a bank. Could you please tell us where a bank is? And he got mad at us. There's a bank up there, there's a bank up there, what are you bothering me for? And I thought, oh my God. Well, we didn't know where we were. We were clueless.
That's terrible.
It was a terrible impression. So we get into the bank, and there's a security guard there, and he's got a gun. And Jean Reynolds is having a fit. She thinks the bank's about to be robbed. That's why this guy's there. I said, no, I think he's just guarding the door in case,
How did you feel at the time? So.
It was kind of weird because it was kind of disconcerting because the other thing was the streets in Boston were very narrow. It was kind of funny because, everything was big in America.
Right.
But Boston is an old city and the streets were tiny,
Right.
And compared with, a lot of other cities, the main downtown, the streets are very small.
Mm-hmm.
But we had a good time working at Lemuel Shattuck. I worked in a unit that was quadriplegic patients, very sad, young boys and girls.
They were pediatrics?
No,
They were.
quadriplegic.
Yeah, I know, but were they quadriplegics? They were young men and women, or?
Mhm.
Okay.
They were like from 16 to 26.
Oh my goodness.
Very sad. Stupid things. In the morning, drinking makes you do stupid things.
So a lot of them were victims. They had alcohol.
Drunk, yeah. Not all. Some got in fights outside a bar. Some were drunk and dove into the shallow end of a pool, banged their heads, broke their spinal cord. Some riding motorbikes on the sand dunes, getting stuck, flying over, landing on their heads. One girl was just sitting in a car and another car banged into her and she jerked back and damaged us. Yeah, there was a kayak football, playing football, being tackled
Mhm.
without equipment on,
Right.
Uh,
So, okay, I think we get it.
you don't wanna talk about it.
No, I mean, let's, so you were,
So I worked
how long
there.
were you working there at that?
For a year,
For a year?
yeah, and I met Dad.
Now, how soon after, so, okay, you had a few bad impressions about the guy, the cabbie, and the cop.
Yeah.
So, what was your social life, and so what were
Well,
you
it was
doing
quite-
after work, and
Well, we didn't do a whole lot, really. There was a lot of, we were all about the same age, and we'd all just get together in one room and just sit and chat and talk, or go to the movies, or go into Boston and go to the movies, or stuff like that.
mm-hmm,
But what happened was, one of the girls was getting married. We didn't know her. But we came on a Monday, and that Friday, she was getting married on a Sunday. Maybe she was Jewish, I don't know. But they decided on Friday they were going to go to this dance, a place where dancing took place. So anyway, they asked us where we'd like to go, so we went. So this young man, I lost track of Gene Reynolds. I don't know what happened.
now where was this dance at?
In Boston.
And do you remember where was the
No.
locale?
No.
Was it at a bar, or where was
It
this?
had a bar, but it was a dance hall,
Okay,
which they had in those days,
uh-huh,
This young man asked me to dance. I thought, oh, this is an opportunity to find out where Jean Reynolds, because I was worried about her, because I couldn't find her.
right.
So I'm dancing around. This guy is asking questions. I wasn't really interested in them. I was just kind of using them to find Jean Reynolds. But anyway,
Did you find Gene Reynolds?
yeah, finally I found him. And so then I started talking to him. His name was John Murphy.
Yeah,
We went to Harvard. Because I didn't realize I was Harvard.
right.
And he was editor-in-chief of the lot of you.
So now, how long did it take before he told you that he was the editor-in-chief of the Law Review?
I don't remember.
Was that something he told you right away?
I don't know. I mean, it meant nothing to me.
I know.
I mean, to me, I didn't know
Sure.
anything about it. Anyway, he had been working at the law review and decided he would stop in there.
Is that right?
Yeah, and so, anyway, he calls me up. Somehow it came out I was Catholic. Called me up and wanted me to make sure I got to church on Sunday.
So he called to check to make sure you got to church.
He would take me to church.
Uh-huh.
So I thought, oh dear God. Looking back, I thought, what a sneaky bastard.
Why do you say he was a sneaky
Well, I
bastard?
mean, who calls somebody else up here to make sure they're going to get to church on Sunday?
He must have been concerned about your soul, right?
Yeah, right. Anyway, that's when it all started, meeting your father. And then the next day, he asked me out. The next day, he wants me to buy his car for $25.
So what was your first impression? You go with him to church, and then
Yeah.
what did you think of him?
It was okay.
Right.
I mean, he was a nice
Seems
guy.
fine.
Yeah.
Okay.
Then next day, he decides to sell me this car, which we have to stop every mile to put water in the radiator. Otherwise, it's steaming up.
So he takes you on a drive in this car?
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
And the car is, and I didn't drive. When I grew up in Scotland, we had transportation. I mean, we walked and got buses and
Right.
trains and took the train into Glasgow or Edinburgh, got the bus. And so I didn't drive, and even in Boston I didn't need to drive, you know, I could go down to
Right.
the underground and get on, take you right into Boston, I mean, so, I said, no, I don't want my car. Then he opens the back door and he brings out a radio, $5 for the radio. I thought, this guy's nuts. Trying to sell me his car, and an old wooden radio. And
Did it work?
I have no idea. I didn't buy it. Remember, I'm Scottish.
Sure.
I'm not buying anything. It's,
Uh-huh.
the car wasn't working, obviously. So I didn't drive. Was the radio working? I have no idea. Why would he sell it? Then I didn't realize, why does he sell this stuff? Because the poor thing had no money. Dad never has money, according to him.
Right. You passed up, but what's the next thing that happened after that?
He asked me out on a day, and we lived in a dorm,
Okay.
and it had a house mother.
Oh, right.
Now, in difference today is, you know, nobody got by this house mother. You come in the door, and, oh, there he is. Got the car. And anyway, the guys were never allowed upstairs.
Right.
So, we went on this date. He came to pick me up, and he had flowers, roses. And I says, oh, can you give my friends a ride into Boston? So he had to run out, hide the flowers, because he didn't want the friends to see the roses.
Right.
So, anyway, he then stopped the car later on, gave me the roses, which I thought was very sweet.
Did you?
But, so we dated, then he decided he had other plans.
So what were you thinking after you started dating him then? What were you starting to think about him?
I liked him, but I had no intentions of staying in the U.S., so.
Right.
My idea of, you know, I didn't want to get involved with it, because
Right.
I only came here for a year, but anyway, he decided he had other things he wanted to do in life. He wanted to be governor of Massachusetts, and I guess he couldn't afford me. Not that he had any money to.
Right.
And he said goodbye. I said, fine, goodbye. Of course, 2 days later, he's called me out
Yeah.
to go out.
How did you feel when he called you back up?
I thought it was very interesting.
So-
I mean, Dad was very funny, and
What did you like about him?
a lot of things.
Like what?
His money. No, he had no money.
Right.
I don't, you talk about having no money. He definitely had no money. I used to give him a dime to get back from the train.
Yeah.
He took me to dinner once. He had a bottle and a brown paper bag that he would sneak and drink at the dinner. That was only one time we went for dinner. We went to dancing at this hotel, and he only had enough money for one Manhattan,
Uh-huh.
and we shared it. So he definitely didn't have any cash.
So, but you overlooked it. What was different or interesting about him?
was fun to be with, and
Yeah.
it was enjoyable to be with, and you know, I began to really like him. You know, so then they asked me, we got in a fight. It was kind of funny, one of these funny things. In church, I forgot my wallet. So he gives me a quarter to put in the plate.
Uh-huh.
Now, to me, God doesn't need to know that God knows that I had every intention to put money in the plate. I don't need somebody giving me a quarter to make me look good putting money in the plate.
Right.
That's not my deal, you know. So I wouldn't take his quarter. And he got mad at me. And I said, well, that's stupid. I don't need your quarter to make me, God knows I had fully intended to put money in the plate.
Right.
It's silly, you know. And anyway, then he asked me to marry him, and I said yes. I don't know why. It's just one of, you know, love is blind, I'll tell you. You don't know why you do things.
When did you know he was for you? So up until...
I don't know if I really knew. It's hard to really know.
I mean, were you anticipating that he was going to ask you to marry you?
No. No.
So when he asked you, and so did you say yes right away?
Yeah. I don't know why. I still don't know why. I don't know why. I just...
Did you have second thoughts afterwards?
No. No. Your father was all fun. You know, we had a lot of good times. Did a lot of good things, and we didn't have a lot of money, and well, I had money.
Right.
I never spent very much on much of anything.
So you got engaged, and how long were after you were dating?
He certainly never produced a ring.
He didn't. So you got engaged. And you accepted, but you had no ring.
Right.
And then that was how long after you had met him were you engaged?
But 4 months.
4 months.
Crazy, isn't it?
Okay. And
then we had to make plans. I said, we should wait a year, save our money, you'll be finished school, you get a job. It's only, we didn't date, for another year. No, we're getting married. We're getting married this summer. And I thought, oh, we can wait a year, surely.
right.
He didn't want to wait. So we made plans to get married. And unfortunately, the laws in Scotland, you have to...
So you were going to go back to Scotland to get married.
Yeah, well, who did I know here?
Right.
I just had a few friends that...
Sure, you didn't know anybody.
I didn't know anybody. I barely knew his family. I think his family were kind of annoyed that I didn't stay in Boston to get married.
So what was your impression of his family?
Well, I really didn't know them.
Sure, I mean, heck, you barely knew Dan.
Yeah. I know, I didn't really... Dad's father had died during this period. So... we went to this guy who got us tickets to Scotland.
So now, at the time, it was very expensive to go travel.
Yeah.
So you went to see some guy to get some cheaper tickets.
Right, at that time they had charter flights. But you had to join a club for 6 months prior to your departure. So he just backdated it. And Dad was in the Irish Talent Club, and I was in the African Missions Club, or vice versa. But it was just a ruse for the Irish to fly planes to Ireland. Because the settler never went to Africa. But anyway, so I booked 2 flights, and we went to this place, I think it was in Roxbury. And this guy comes out from this tailor, and he's got no holes in his elbows.
He's got holes in his elbows, and it's right.
And I'm handing over money.
Now, did you have to pay up front for these tickets?
Oh yeah,
Oh my goodness. How much do you remember how much they were?
I don't remember. 300? Yeah, 300 each. I'm the one with the money, you know. It's
So you had to lay over $600, some guy who's
Yeah.
a tailor who had holes in his...
Right.
All right.
Dad said he was real.
Okay.
He was part of the Irish community, you know. Anyway, I went a month before Dad, because Dad was sitting in the barracks there. But the laws in Scotland is one of the partners had to be in Scotland 3 weeks before the wedding day.
Okay.
And the other one had to be there a week before, because you're not getting married in the Church of Scotland. And so, and our banners were read off the local Protestant church, Presbyterian church, the Reverend Ian Fleming posted our banns of marriage. And so with Father Ward and Ian Fleming were both helped us get this whole thing settled with the laws of Scotland.
Mm-hmm.
So that's, you know, we, and my parents were very good. I mean, when I think about it, they paid for nothing. They put on the wedding, they did everything, they got the photographers, they organized the hotel, they just did everything. It was just wonderful. And we even borrowed my father's car and left me without a car. When I think about it, I think, oh my goodness, how could we do that? But they willingly gave us their car so we could go on a honeymoon. We went all over Scotland. And we had a good time.
So how long was your honeymoon then?
A couple of weeks.
Mm-hmm. And then you flew back to the United States?
Well, we flew back in different flights, you know.
Okay.
Dad had 3 more days, and he went to Ireland. And he spent time with his mother's family, and at her family farm, which her brother had inherited, the oldest brother had inherited, which is one of the reasons she came to this country was, and the oldest, what do you call it, progenitor? The oldest, primogenitor, the oldest boy, not the oldest girl, the oldest boy inherited everything. And the rest were left without anything.
All right.
Which, when you think about it, it's totally unfair. But I don't know if that's still the law in Britain. And certainly, if you're watching Downton Abbey, that's what's going on there, you know, who the heir will be.
Mm-hmm.
It has to be male, you know,
Right.
which I guess part of the culture.
So then you get back here,
Yeah.
How did you tell us about life here? Where did you settle, and tell about your life early here?
Well, I got back here
Yeah.
and I'm pregnant.
Oh my goodness.
Guess who with? You. Unfortunately.
When did you realize you were pregnant, Mom?
Well, women know.
I know.
When they-
I know, but when did you realize it? When you were over here?
Yeah.
Okay.
And Dad had rented an efficiency apartment with a year's lease.
He rented this in advance of you coming over?
Right. Well, unfortunately, Dad had a job in New Hampshire, and I told everybody we're going to live in New Hampshire.
Right.
Dad got cold feet at the end, or whatever. He decided he didn't want to be in New Hampshire. Came back to Boston, persuaded them that he could take the bar in Boston, and then rented an efficiency apartment in Boston, which for him, fortunately, was 5 minutes from his work, and it was an hour from my work. So that was the beginning of my life with John Murphy. How one is being taken advantage of without one realizing it. And I thought, well,
So you were working while you were
could have
pregnant?
taken a place in Arlington
All
or
right.
Belmont or someplace, which would have been halfway for each of us.
Sure.
But no, it was 5 minutes. So I had to get up very early in the morning, get the underground to Harvard Square to Waltham, from Waltham up to Metropolitan State Hospital. Because it said I didn't have enough psychiatric lectures to sit the state boards, which was
So
true.
you had to get qualified here.
Which was true because in the United Kingdom, it was a specialty being a psychiatric nurse, so we didn't have enough lectures because we would be working in a psychiatric hospital. So I went there to work, to go to class. And so I just stayed on working there. Maybe that's why you're so crazy, Johnny. All these crazy. Actually, it wasn't bad. It was kind of an experimental unit of mixed, boys, male and female, and although they were separated dormitories, but the day room was mixed. But it wasn't that hard. It was really, there wasn't any kind of really, really bad psychiatric problems in that group. Mostly we were young.
Mm-hmm.
Some, I don't think he could ever do anything really for them. And the psychiatrist, there was one psychiatrist who the patients would line up to go see him, and he'd come in like this. He didn't want to even look at them, and I thought, boy, he needs a psychiatrist himself. He was from Austria or someplace. It was just weird. But anyway, so I worked there until a couple of years before you were born. And at that time, the Boston Strangler was prowling around Beacon Hill, where we lived in Beacon Hill.
And he was a serial killer?
Yeah. And so I made Dad, when I was working the late shift, I had Dad stay up and walk me home from the tube station.
Right.
Because I was afraid, you never know these guys.
Sure.
But I would get up early and Dad would start work at 9 and he'd get up at 8:30 and just toddle down there. It was a living room, kitchen and bathroom. And when you came, you took the doors off the cupboard that was in the kitchen and put a porter crib in there. But it was fine.
Right.
I mean, you know, people think they have to have everything. You know, you don't.
Right.
You know, I mean, I had a baby, but I mean, how long does it take to clean an efficiency apartment?
Right.
Not that we had a lot of furniture. But and I used to bought a second-hand Marmot pram. I'd put you in there and we'd go down to Boston Commons or Boston Garden. I'd sit there and read a book, and you'd be lying there sleeping away, and I'd push it back up and fix dinner. I mean, I'd all the time, I thought, wow, this is great. I mean, I was used to working all the time.
Right.
And so here I just had this baby, and you were actually a very good baby. I mean, really. You weren't a crybaby or anything like that, but I mean, and you slept when you were 10 days old, well, you slept from like 11 till 6, which to me is like sleeping through the night.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, the first night you did that, I thought you were dead. Because it was starting to get light, and I thought, he never woke up. And I'm creeping in there, like, yes, no. I thought, oh. I guess I was the first scary baby. Out of many, many, many more to come.
Right.
But anyway, it was interesting living on Beacon Hill. Across the way was a minister, with Smith Court, a minister, and he played the organ. Then at the end was cold water flats, which they call cold water flats. And this couple, she had a very manly voice. And they were always fighting, always yelling at each other. And they would call the police, complaining about the minister playing his organ. And then they called the police on us, because we had gone upstairs, and to the people upstairs, and I was teaching them how to do some Irish, Scottish country dancing. We were playing away, you know, music, you know. And the cops show up. These assholes complain, you know, and every morning, like at 6 in the morning, they'd be yelling at each other, you know. And I thought, oh my goodness.
So how did the cops handle you guys?
Oh, nothing. We invited them in, and I'm just teaching them how to do Scottish country dance, and they didn't care. But, you know, we were just a group of people that, you know, we weren't doing anything illegal, or, you know, we were just having fun. And it's just these people just go nuts, you know.
Right.
They were just nuts. So, anyway, that was.
So then, after then when did you guys? So you were there in Boston. How did you feel like you were okay in this little place?
Yeah.
What was your plans, or what would you want going forward? And then how did you react? Dad wanted to go to Illinois. And
Fine. He got a job with a single practitioner, and he wanted to do a lot of trial law.
when this was in
But,
Boston.
Yeah, and unfortunately, as I said, when you're young, you don't know enough.
Right.
And you don't get to do big trial cases
Right.
right out of law school. You don't have the experience. So anyway, he got an opportunity to, I think he had other opportunities, but to get a master's in law in Illinois. And so we had a stipend to go there. And so we went to Illinois.
Where in Illinois?
It was called Gifford, Illinois.
And what was the school?
It was a small, well, it was Champaign-Urbana,
Okay.
University of Illinois, Champaign-Urbana. But we lived in Gifford, which was a small
Right.
little farming community. And Illinois was flat. And then the autumn, when the corn was high, the road would go for miles, just flat, and there was just nothing to see but corn. It was just flat, flat, flat.
Meant to, sorry to interrupt you. Do you remember the address you lived in Gifford, and do you remember the address in Exeter or wherever your efficiency apartment in Boston?
In Boston, it was in Two Smith Court.
Two Smith Court.
Yes.
And then do you
It was
remember?
just off Joy Street. I don't remember Gifford's.
Did you live in a
address.
rented house or?
It was a doctor's office. It was a doctor's office.
You were living in.
Well,
How you live in the doctor's house?
Fortunately, before that, maybe Mike Maxis was coming for the summer to live in.
And this is Mary is
Mary's
dad's
sister.
sister, and then Mike
Husband.
Maxis is her
And
husband.
they were coming to live. He was doing something. And so Dad was looking for a place for them to stay. And what he came across was a place in Concord, Massachusetts. A professor, a Harvard professor, wanted somebody to stay there
Right.
because he went up to Maine for the summer.
Mm-hmm.
But he needed someone to stay and babysit. But he didn't want anybody with children. But fortunately, you were a baby. So that meant that you weren't going to be running around being destructive.
Right.
We didn't want that. So we took a place in Concord. And Mary, I think, got a place in.
And Dad
Somewhere.
was still working in Boston at this
Yeah,
time?
and so
Okay.
we were forced to buy a car.
Okay.
Fortunately,
So why didn't you just stay in your efficiency? You just wanted something more room or?
well, it was hot.
It was hot and this was cool, right,
And there was no air. We had a little tiny fan.
right.
And so we stayed in Concord, and it was a beautiful place. It was a very nice house. We had a lot of fun there. And you could see Ralph Waldo Emerson's house in the distance. There was just trees in this place. So we were forced to buy a car. Fortunately, my idea was, when I was working, my paycheck went in the bank. Because I felt, I mean, if you spend all the money you earn, you can get in a lot of trouble. Because you never know what's down the road.
Mm-hmm.
So I always had this feeling that if I'm working, it goes in the bank for a rainy day, because you can never tell. So fortunately, my income was in the bank, and so we were able to buy a car, the Comet, which you loved.
This is a Mercury Comet.
Yeah. So anyway,
I think it was a 63 or 60.
I don't know.
Okay.
But anyway, we used that, and then we went to Illinois in that car. And we had the pram on top with pots and pans in it. And you know, when we got married, we had nothing. We had one pot. And of course, nobody here gave us wedding gifts. That was the funny thing. I asked Dad's mother, can you give me the names of people so my mother could send announcements of the wedding? Because she knew people wouldn't come. She said, oh, we don't do that thing here. And I thought, So we didn't get any kind of gifts or anything. I got gifts in Scotland, which my mother eventually sent in a big trunk to us, but they were mostly linens and things like that. But for so we had nothing, but we managed, you know.
Right.
I learned to cook in this one little pot. Then we got another pot, which I still have today. It was just amazing how slowly you accumulate stuff. I've got more stuff that I never ever used now. But it never bothered us. Well, it didn't bother me. I don't think it ever bothered your father at all. It's just as long as it was grub on the table, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But it was an interesting place to live on Joy Street because it was right in the center of Boston. So it was really enjoyable. It was a nice place. And there's a lot of rubble, you know, now it's Government Square. At that time it was just rubble. And you were baptized in the church. It was a Polish church, I think, in the middle of the rubble. Mass General was just down from there. And now it's all Government Square and they built it up.
Mm-hmm.
And
So getting back to Illinois, so you were in
Yeah.
Illinois.
in Illinois,
So how long were, what would you do for, because it was pretty quiet there, so what would you
it
do?
was horrible.
Yeah,
And the people were not friendly. They really weren't very friendly at all. They were insular and farmers, and they didn't understand these university people. You know.
right.
And the people next door, actually, the house, they rented the house and we rented the doctor's office because the doctor had lived in the house and this was the doctor's office. And it was a living room and 2 exam rooms, which was 2 bedrooms, and then a bathroom. It just had a tub and a sink. And toilet was separate, and then it had a big cupboard for linens, but I guess
Right.
for supplies. The kitchen was kind of,
So what did you do for, so what was the most, what did you do for stimulation or?
nothing much. Let me tell you, there wasn't.
I remember you told me about,
We'd take you to the Bull up the street.
I'd look at the bull.
You loved the Bull. You would go crazy. You just go crazy. And that's Bull. There wasn't much to do in this place.
Sure.
It was the most boring place on earth. It had a grocery, it had 3 pubs, a grocery. I don't think it had a drugstore. There was nothing much there.
So
There
now,
wasn't even a bus out.
so how, and then how long did you stay there?
We stayed there a year.
Uh-huh. And then from there, what was your thinking about?
Well,
where
I
to go?
went to work too.
Oh, you were working?
We had to because we were kind of running out of funds.
Uh-huh.
And,
The stipend was not quite that
No,
generous.
no.
So what were you doing working there?
I worked in the maternity unit.
Maternity at that point?
It was in downtown Urbana.
So what'd you do for childcare then?
Your father would come home and take care of you.
Oh, so you'd work after he came home?
Yeah, well, he would come home. Because his classes would be over.
All right, and you'd work in the
And he
evenings?
could study at home.
Right,
Yeah,
okay.
I worked the evenings, yeah.
How'd you like that?
That was fine. That was fine. The only problem, I was the only person on that unit. It's kind of weird. It was a postpartum unit. But eventually we left there and Dad got a job at the University of Cincinnati. And it was nice to come from Champaign, Urbana, and come into Cincinnati and see some hills. Because for so long, everything had been so flat and uninteresting. And the thing about Champaign-Urbana, there wasn't anything interesting there either.
Right.
And Bob Hope came to the stadium. It was a big deal. And you couldn't go dancing and drinking. They were separate. Which I didn't mind, but I mean, it was just kind of strange.
Right.
And of course we didn't do it. But an old lady, we could get an old lady who would babysit for us. But not very often.
Right.
We do that.
So tell us your first impression. So the Hills were in Cincinnati.
Yeah.
And they were a challenge. I understand that you were driving.
Yeah, they were. I'd learned to drive in Illinois, and of course it was flat.
And then what kind of
So
car,
there
what
was no
transmission car did you have?
Well, it was stick shift.
It was a stick shift.
Right.
And that requires a clutch where you have to stick your
Yeah.
foot on the clutch to take it out of gear.
That's right.
All right.
That was very difficult. And at that time, of course, they didn't have baby seats or when you think about it. When you think about the kids in the helmets and they're riding their bike, the helmets and all that. There wasn't any of that. There wasn't any car seats or anything.
Right.
You know, it's really, when you think. In fact, when we went to Illinois driving there, we went out to Canada and came down. We were just lying on the floor under my feet. You know, it was just a baby. You'd fall asleep and I'd just put you down.
Sure. So you got to Cincinnati. Where did you live when you were in
We
Cincinnati?
lived in Morgan's Hall, which was a high-rise dorm,
And Dad was teaching?
teaching at University of Cincinnati Law School.
Okay.
And it was, we met the Casados there. They lived next door to us. So they were good friends. They were good friends for many years, but kind of lost touch with them. Don't know, they must have moved or I don't know what happened. It's amazing how you totally lose touch with people that you used to have a good relationship with, but suddenly they're just no longer there anymore.
Sure.
And I'd love to meet them again. They were a lot of fun.
So they were also, this was a big, so there was a lot of graduate students or
Yeah.
professors, and so there's a lot of
Well, it was mostly graduate
students
and some,
and their families there.
yeah. Well, most of them were little kids.
Right, with little kids. So similar to you guys.
Yeah, yeah.
You were not local Cincinnati people.
No. Well, the reason we rented there was we didn't know the area.
Sure.
So we then rented a place on Cornell Place,
What was the address on Cornell's place?
3435 Cornell.
Was it an apartment number? or-
Apartment, yeah.
Okay.
It was a
We were the first floor.
two-family apartment. We lived on the first floor. It was very nice.
Now, when did Jane come?
Jane came in November 5th.
Like when you were at Cornell?
Yeah,
Okay.
the first day in Cornell.
The first day of Cornell, that's when she came?
No,
Okay.
the incident occurred that told me I was in for a lifetime of running after my son. I'm out on this little deck with stairs going down.
This is in the backyard
This
of
is
the,
the reason we rented this place, it had a fenced-in backyard.
okay.
And I figured it'd be great for you. You could run around there, and it had a sandbox, and it'd just be great.
And you were pregnant with Jane at this
I
time?
was pregnant with Jane. This was September. She was born in November.
Okay, so you were very pregnant.
Yeah. And so I let you go outside, we just moved in, there's boxes everywhere. Let you go outside, and you immediately go to the fence, and there's a chain link fence. You had little red sneakers on, cats, and you immediately go up, 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 and over, and start running up the side. And I'm running, trying to run through the apartment, the boxes and everything, trying to get out. And you're right there running down the street. And my thought,
I would like to apologize for that now, Mom, 50 years
and
later.
that happened, I don't know how many times. You were escaping, I don't know you were escaping. Maybe you were looking for something that you didn't find in the house. Maybe you're looking for another mother and father. I don't know what you were, but you were notorious. You were brought back to the house by the police, by Susan upstairs. You did a lot of bad things. God, I don't know how you did it. I just, you were a wonderful baby. And once you got your legs moving, oh dear God. I lost 10 pounds that year.
When you were in Cincinnati the first year, right? When I was, right?
I was skinny.
So Jane came. What was she like as a baby?
She was good. She didn't sleep as well as you did. So in running, and she would wake up when you were taking naps. She'd wake up and I'd run and get her. Because I didn't want her to wake you up.
Oh, I was taking a nap.
Because you're trouble.
Okay.
Because taking care of a baby and you trying to get out the door. And they even put a lock up the top. Unfortunately, we had ladder back chairs. And you used them as a ladder. And you got up there and undid it, pulled it back, got down, pulled it back, and you're out the door. And I wouldn't even know. I'd be in the back bedroom changing a diaper. And you'd be gone. You drove me crazy. I mean, you really did. I mean, I thought, people think I'm neglecting you. I'm not. I just didn't know what to do. I should have done what Mrs. Beluan did. She did to Jerry. She would tie his leg to the table. And I thought, I never thought of that. Maybe I should have thought of that. Tie your leg to the table. You know?
Right.
But it was, he did that a lot. I mean, the policeman brought you home. I see it on TV today. These people, and the kids, well, they've sort of fallen asleep, and the kids have gotten out. I had never done that. I was maybe in the back bedroom, and you were supposed to be in the living room playing with your toys, or in the bedroom playing, and you would sneak out the back, or you sneak out the front. And you'd be, you know, and this big black policeman said, "Is this your son?" And her dad had a tuxedo on, and I had this long dress I had made to go to this ball. And he must have thought, oh, these horrible parents. And what happened, I had seen the door was open, but I assumed you had gone up to the Halversons. Because you would do that sometimes. You'd go up there and play with the kids up there.
Right.
But you had gone out the side door. And you had gone up to the Smiths. We had a babysitter who didn't know who you were. And they called the cops.
Oh.
And he's coming down the street saying, does anybody know this child?
Oh.
Does anybody know this child? So, it was interesting raising you. He gave me a run for my money, I'm telling you. Oh dear.
So now, so Janie, when did she start walking?
Well, all of you took your sweet time walking. In fact, I had you at a doctor's office in Boston, and because you weren't walking, it was like 14 and a half months old and you still weren't walking. And other people's kids were walking at 10 months and 11 months. And you guys, you all took your time. And I don't know why, it was just, you took your time and just walking and, and once you got your leg, you never stopped.
So now then you guys moved. When did you decide to, did you want your own place, or whose idea was that?
Oh, my parents came, my mother and father came to live with us for like 3 months.
Now, okay, they were was that the impetus to, we better get a house?
No, we just thought we'd like to buy a house.
Okay.
And so we bought the house in Clifton Hills Terrace,
And what's the address there?
852.
Okay.
And it was a good choice, because after a while there was a lot of children on the street, and it was sort of a one-way street,
It was
dead
pretty
end.
quiet, yeah.
Dead end street. And there was a lot of fun the kids had growing up there. I think you did. You could walk up to the stores and go to Graders, go to the movies, and walk back down. It wasn't that far. It was really good. A lot of fun. It's quite different now. It's kind of neglected looking now. There's no children. It's kind of sad. It's like that poem, The Deserted Village,
Mm-hmm.
Things are all gone. Things change. It's almost like you never can go back, because things evolve and change. You can never go back.
Yeah.
We found that out in a lot of different ways.
Right.
On our honeymoon, we spent time at this place called the Bailey Nickel Jarvey, our first night there, and it was waiters with, the napkins over the sleeves, and we had duck a la orange, and, it was very fancy, it was very, very nice. 20 years later, I think, the Andersons went there, and then we went there a year later, and it was a dump. It was horrible. And I thought, it just changes,
Right.
People change,
Right.
things change. Things that you have in your mind that you had a good time, but now it's just totally different,
Sure. Right.
So it's like neighborhoods, they change. Some go for the worst, some turn around and
Right.
and they do better, think of the things.
So now, we were there at Clifton Hills, and then you guys when I was 9 or 10, then when I was in 4th grade, then you went to do some traveling, and Dad had
Dad had a sabbatical.
a sabbatical in D.C.
Right.
No, I had special leave.
So he, anyways, was working as a Department of Justice
Right.
and then we were in D.C.
Mm-hmm.
And then did that for a while, for like a semester. So Janie
Right.
and I went to school
Right.
in D.C.
Right.
And then then Dad had a sabbatical then over at Exeter.
Right.
Right. So now at the time, then you were diagnosed, or then you started having MS symptoms,
Right, when I was in DC.
right? So tell us about, like, what were you initially, what originally happened? And
My neck, just below my neck, and down my arms, was very difficult to move, to manipulate. It was really difficult, my arm. And I went to see the doctor, and they did an x-ray, they couldn't find anything. And it was just difficult. And Deirdre was in diapers, and so,
so you had Deirdre.
yeah, Deirdre was,
Yeah, and by the way, so you had Deirdre in Cincinnati.
Deirdre was, yeah,
And Deirdre had problems with the delivery, and she had,
yeah.
so you had a baby then in DC, and then you're having all these physical
Right.
difficulties, right?
Right.
But then, meanwhile, so they didn't really have a handle on
No,
it.
they didn't diagnose it. Then I went to England,
Right,
and I went to see the neurologist there, and it,
the neurologist, right?
neurologist,
Right.
yeah.
Hmm.
And they told me they couldn't find anything,
Right,
but they told Dad I had multiple sclerosis,
they told Dad.
yeah. Which I thought was very deceiving.
Did Dad tell you?
No,
Okay,
so, anyway, I think we should stop there.
okay.